you are welcome along to a very special Huddle Breakdown where you're stuck with me hosting this week. Our good friend Laura is otherwise disposed, enjoying herself out in this wonderful weather. And I'm in Merchant City broadcasting and getting sunburned in Scotland in April. Hello, what the hell's going on? But with my good friend Alan Morrison, we're here to review what was a sham of a game, and we'll get into that on Sunday with St Johnstone, and we'll talk a lot about that in depth and all the response to it. But Alan, how are you doing?
Yeah, all right, all right. Really tired, like Laura. So I think Laura's down in Yorkshire somewhere. Yorkshire's a big place. I'm not exactly sure myself whereabouts in Yorkshire she is, but that's where I am, and the weather has just been glorious. So I've been out walking today, but knackered, man. Too far and
Well,
too high, too far and too high, and just knackered.
I apologize in advance, but causation correlation, I flew in on, I think it was, what was it, Tuesday last week, and the day before the weather got great. I mean, I think I'm going to get sunburned walking around Glasgow for a week. It's crazy. So
Yeah,
is it because I
yeah,
came? Is it not? Up to you.
yeah.
It's up to people to decide whether it was
Pints make no
causation or
difference
correlation.
to to how you feel either. Really, you're
No,
tired and sort of all that.
no. When you drink too much
No
alcohol, it doesn't
impact.
matter. But
It doesn't matter.
but I will say that we might put past the 10. It's brazen opportunism. If we want to pass the 10 to our audience and say, let's get this guy back to Scotland more often, first class on the Concorde. If the audience is willing to pay for it.
Well, there's a big payoff if you're going to get a sort of sunburned, drunken version of you. I think that's probably worth it, isn't it? Yeah, I think the audience will go for that. Yeah,
Fair enough. Well, let's get down to the nitty gritty. St. Johnstone, obviously hugely disappointing. I wrote a column on huddlebreakdown.com yesterday. We're recording on Tuesday. Basically, humble pie. I did not see this coming. I went through how I screwed up my analysis going into the game. Damn thing about predicting the future is it's not as easy as examining the past. So, Alan, what is your decomposition of how this turned into a complete train wreck?
yeah. It was unexpected in the sense that I think there's no doubt there's in terms of there's definitely a lull, let's call it a mini crash of form going on here. I actually looked at, I will put this up somewhere. I'm not exactly sure I'm going to put it yet. I might just do a little piece and just post it for everyone. Actually, looking at XG in the first half of games only and plotting that. Now there has been a bit of a slump on that, which correlated to when we were playing Champions League matches in midweek, and it kind of so we started the season up here like with about a +1 xG difference advantage in the first half of games, and then it crashed really right down as we were playing every other week in the Champions League as well. Then it went up again as those games finished, and we played over the January sort of February period, and then you can pretty much put it down to the after the Bayern Munich game, it crashed again. So there's clearly something going on here which I don't think we've seen before. I went back over. Um, all of the seasons really this century. And yeah, there's probably, I don't know, 10, 11 seasons where, been a discernible drop off in form once the league has been won. Right, so not before, but after. There's a number of seasons. 22, 23 being the most obvious when Ange left, and we had 4 games. We won one, we drew one, we lost two, conceded 9 goals in 3 games, etc. All the way back to even the 2000-2001 season, where although we won the 3 games after the title was sewn up, we lost the last 2 games before the cup final. So yeah, apart from that, there's a post-title winning mini slump in all of those seasons. What we haven't seen before is this kind of pre-title winning mini slump, if you want to call it that, and it does seem to stem from that Bayern Munich game. So you know, a lot of chat about this. Rodgers was probably uncharacteristically combative in terms of his post-match thoughts on that. So, let's get into that. I don't necessarily actually agree with what he's saying in terms of, generalizing players that almost aren't trying or not putting in the effort, or whatever you want to call it, however you want to characterize it. I think there's probably more going on than that, but we can't deny that there has been a slowdown, if you like. But the reasons for that, I think, are probably not one thing, but sort of many, many and varied, really.
I am 100% in agreement. So I had my multi-sport analogy ready for this, locked and loaded, Alan, which is if you are a hockey player heading into your free agent year, as we would say in North America, and you're playing on a surface of slush, are you going to go completely balls to the wall in a game that basically doesn't have any impact on whether you're going to win the league or make the playoffs as they would do in hockey? When you could do an ACL, you could do an Achilles, you could fly into the wall and break your shoulder. Probably not. And the pitch, like I get why people don't want to use the pitch as an excuse. And it's not an excuse in the sense of the competitive balance of the two sides. Like the resource distribution is so skewed that it's not an excuse, but it is an attribution. And we couldn't play the way we play. And a bunch of players, if you're just Jeffrey Schlupp and you're sitting there trying to, receive passes that are bouncing all over the place, you have no clue where they're going because it's a cow pasture that has dried out. That's how I would frame it. I mean, it was obnoxious how bad the pitch was. And to Rogers' credit, they didn't want to blame that. I get it. But I thought it was at a level of, it'd be like playing basketball where no one if you play basketball, they mop the floor with a dry mop to get all of the dust off of it. So when you're cutting, your high top sneakers don't slide, right? Well, if no one does that, you're going to slide all over the place. And that's a hugely impactful factor in the game. So balls are bouncing all over our players, just bouncing off. Guys can't control the ball. And you could see it was clearly having a huge impact on how guys were passing, reticent to pass because who knows where the hell it's going. And the last thing I'll say before I'll bring you back in is in what I wrote on Monday was St. Johnston's long ball percentage, how often they go long with the ball, which they have not been a long ball team. We talked about this in a preview last Thursday with Martin, was that we expected them to play more out of the back. Well, hello, mea culpa. The pitch didn't allow it, and they were smart. They didn't do it as much. And when they tried it, we basically overwhelmed them. But they doubled their rate of going long in this game based off versus their league average for the season. Smartly so. Like a lot of the credit for this game goes to them capitalizing on the conditions, and we were languid. Like I'm not suggesting that we weren't languid, and there wasn't a huge problem with intensity and energy, that type of thing. But if I'm Jeffrey Schlupp, I'm like, F this. Like I'm going to do my knee in, and I got a contract I got to negotiate in a couple of months. Like these guys are human beings. It comes back to what we've talked about regularly. So I think those are huge factors that, and this is coming from the spreadsheet shacking guy who, generally is focused on the numbers. But I think these kind of qualitative aspects of this game were underweighted relative to these guys are gutless and, they're not putting forth effort and that kind of thing. So that verbal diarrhea over, what do you think about that?
So I actually thought there was, to me, there was at least three players who, in the first half especially, just didn't look comfortable at all trying to actually play football on that pitch.
On the cow pasture.
Yeah, definitely. You could even look like you could change direction. Trusty and Engels. And now these are three kind of quite big physical guys, and maybe you could say, well, is that a kind of critique of their technique? Are they guys for whom physicality and power and all that sort of stuff is actually stronger than their technique should be? But these guys have probably never played on a pitch like that. Engels has played Bundesliga, The other two guys have been playing in the EPL or the English Championship. The pitches are absolutely pristine. I mean, they're like bowling greens, right? I don't know if they've
Yeah.
ever. I don't know in terms of, maybe when they were younger and playing youth football and all that, of course. But in terms of their professional careers, I don't know how many times they've played on a pitch like that. But I'm not making excuses for them because the technique should probably be better than that. But those three in particular stood out to me as three players who were really struggling just for the basics. And also, I don't know why, because Sinisalo had half the number of passes in the game that Schmeichel would have. I think he had 20 completed. Schmeichel would have 40, probably near 50 in a game like that where we're starting from the back a lot. But we didn't go to him. We didn't use him, which means we didn't create the overload. We didn't create that overload. That Schmeichel creates basically a 3-on-2. Even when they've got two forwards, Schmeichel can create that 3-on-2. You can split the centre backs and you can get the ball moving quicker. We didn't do that. I don't know whether that's because Sinisalo wasn't comfortable, demanding the ball, or whether the players didn't trust him, or whether there was a coaching decision made that, look, this isn't a strength of his. We're going to put him under far too much pressure if we bobble the ball back to him. Therefore, let's just not do that. I don't know. But even if I accept everything you've said, and I do, why did we play the way we did? And that to me is on Rodgers. Why are we trying to play out from the back every single time when the ball's bubbling all over the pitch and your two centre backs can barely control the
Yep.
ball, and it's,
Yep.
it's hitting people in the shin every time it kind of comes to them? Why are we? Why aren't we going more direct? Why are we trying to Why are we trying to play intricate one-touch passing through the middle of the pitch when they're marking man to man and they've packed as many players as they can into the middle of the pitch? You don't have to be a very good footballer to have an outstanding display if your role is to disrupt a passing move on a pitch like that from the centre. Any Neanderthal can do that, seriously. So you just
You could be
play
managed by Derek McInnes and do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying they are. St Johnstone, I don't want to take anything away from them. I thought they adapted their game plan, as you said. They played more direct. They banged balls into channels. And then, of course, getting that early lead meant that every single throw-in became a big event. Every single free kick became a big drama. Everything was taking forever. Um, you know, but we know, listen, we know David Dickinson. We know that he didn't once, didn't once in the whole match look to hurry them along. This 8 second rule the goalkeepers are going to have. The guy Fisher was averaging between 18 and 25 seconds in the second half. In terms of right, all of that. But listen, you can't blame them. And if the referee lets
No,
them do it,
not at all.
no harm to them. That's absolutely fine. But
Yep.
the point being, why did we not adapt the way that we're playing? Trying to play tricky, intricate balls down the middle. The space was in the flanks. Get it into the flanks. Get it early. It was a game perfect for Adamida. Why didn't Adamida start down the middle? Why didn't Maida be coming in from the... Because again, Maida trying to control a bouncing ball in the middle of the pitch, that's just a nightmare. He's just technically not up to it, even on a good day. So have him running in, chasing flick-ons, and he's, dynamite. So
Yep.
Rodgers can criticise the players, and maybe right to do so in terms of, and we'll come on to the aspects of the game where there wasn't the required intensity, absolutely. But I would have to question him as to why we played the way that we did. St Johnstone adapt their game. They're a passing team. They play out from the back. They didn't because the conditions didn't allow it, and they adapted and they got success from it. They got over 9 shots during the game. They created quite a bit of danger from that. We didn't. So yeah, that I agree, and I think that it was a struggle for the players, and we shouldn't underplay that. It's not to excuse all aspects of the performance, but I think Rodgers needs to look at himself as well in that regard.
Yeah, and there's an aspect of this that we don't have privy to, which is tracking data, obviously. So we can't, we can't assign blame to a guy like Kuhn, who I think did the eye test. A lot of people would say he's, this is an Americanism, Alan. He's been mailing it in recently, maybe not putting forth the level of intensity.
There were two tales with Kuhn.
Yeah.
Right? One is his reluctance to take the man on the outside. That's where you need bravery in the final third. And then the second specifically, did he shat it effectively when he had that chance to go in And he would have to throw himself at the ball. Well, the St Johnstone guy did. So St Johnstone guy, they're playing for their
Yep.
livelihoods, right? They're playing for if they get relegated to the Championship, half of these players are going to get let go. So all that, right? So
Well,
those were two little tells, and maybe Kuhn, like you say, because that was redolent of his performances in recent times, might be one that I could get behind a criticism that Rodgers levelled. But I'm struggling with the rest of the players, if I'm honest with you.
I understand and agree with that, but this goes back to incentives. And if you're Schlupp, if you're Kuhn, if you're anyone who's kind of scheming with their agent, Schlupp obviously is his contract's done in the summer. But if you're any player who's saying I'm ready to move on, which we've talked about this endlessly in recent weeks, we have a not insignificant number of players that are vital to the team where they're kind of natural progression. They've been here 2.5, 3, 4 seasons. Wouldn't be crazy if they would be scheming, planning to move on. If they're looking at this saying, I just walked into a dry cow pasture, the ball's bouncing everywhere. I don't want to do my Achilles. I don't want to do my ACL. If you're Kuhn, is it crazy that you're going to be like, and this game actually doesn't really mean anything. Like I'm not saying that obviously amongst the people that traveled up to Perth that, I get people want a home clincher for the league. But if I'm Kuhn and my agent, I don't give a shit excuse my language. I don't give a shit when it gets clinched. No offense. Even if it's a fraction of 1% risk that I'm going to do my ACL on that horrid pitch, why am I risking that? Like it's nuts. I'm away to make 5 times or 4 times or whatever I think, or whatever someone's telling my agent that I'm going to get moving on. He's being a human being like that. That's. I'm not we're not excusing. It's explaining what could be happening with the conditions that these guys were playing in on Sunday. And it was just it was nuts in that way.
We're saying that Alistair Johnston, Cameron Carter-Vickers, Cal McGregor are not giving 100%, are not trying their best. I mean, that's ludicrous. I mean, to me, any of those suggestions are ludicrous. But what is going on? Well, Alistair Johnston's played a lot of football this season.
Flogged.
A lot.
Yeah.
He's travelled a lot. He's travelled a long way. He's played a lot of international games. Carter Vickers is similar, not quite as many, but we know with his injury sort of profile as well. Hatate's played a lot of football this season as well. I think Hatate's always a special case. With Hatate, the thing is, he moves to the beat of his own drum.
He is maddening.
He moves to the beat of his own drum. It wouldn't matter whether he decides game to game, moment to moment, how much he's going to put it. He's just his own little unique little universe of Rio. And actually, he was one of the better performers in some ways. I mean, he was careless. He missed loads of great chances. He butchered more good chances, and yet he still, in terms of attacking output, he probably surpassed everybody else. Again, I wouldn't put it down to he wasn't trying hard. He's just doing real stuff, just what he always does. Jota's building his way back to fitness. You're telling me Maeda's not trying his heart out. I mean, that's ludicrous. We've seen Maeda get tired. We've seen Maeda come back from international duty and be tired and be quite ineffective because of that. So
he's not a robot. I'm not. What the hell? He's not a robot.
I'm not making excuses for these guys because I think the one area where I will say, and we don't know team orders either. So the one area where Celtic were absolutely, and Rodgers would have an absolute right to have a go at all of them, was in counter pressing and pressing. The 100%. Numbers were way down,
20% down. Probably, at least I saw that.
To be fair to Rodgers, it's the one area he says we do this. That's the start of our game. It is the start of our game. So I think, fair enough, let's look at that aspect of it. But why was that? If St Johnstone are not willing to be pressed because they're launching the ball as soon as they get it, guess what? Your pressing numbers are going down. If the ball's in play for 20 minutes, your pressing numbers are going to go down. If you're defending high throws and long free kicks, you're not pressing, right? All of those situations would also add to the low pressing numbers. But having said all that, collectively, the team didn't press as aggressively, and that I think we have to appreciate as well that probably is a starting kind of platform, if you like, for the attacking, actually. So even though it's a defensive strategy, it's actually the baseline for attacking. And we probably felt that we're going to be able to press the hell out of these today, and we're going to murder them on their own pitch, as we talked about pre-game, and it didn't work out that way.
To me, it was a synthesis of these various factors. So you had the pitch being a train wreck. You have, I've written about this a couple of times in the last month, that I framed it as jeopardy, not when the league is clinched, right? Because the league's effectively been done for a while now. Like, unless you're really paranoid. I mean, it's just the way that Rangers are playing. They weren't going to not drop points at some kind of material degree. So, or it was very unlikely anyway, in my estimation. So, the league's been functionally done, even though it's not technically done. So these guys are human beings. So they're going to kind of, like I said, as I call it, jeopardy. So it's only natural that the intensity level is going to drop off a little bit. And we talk about, it's like maybe 3 to 1% difference in intensity that makes a huge difference. When we went into the Allianz in Bayern, that was my whole thesis, was that these guys were off a Leverkusen game where they spent everything basically trying to wrap up the league into Bundesliga. And they came in kind of mailing it in against us. And, they did what they had to do. Like, ultimately, they got the result they needed. But, God, we went into that game saying, oh, my God, this pressing machine and all that. They didn't do any of that. Like, they were just languid, not really all that intense. And that's what we were. Like, we've been on multiple occasions now. The games where we're not performing is we're kind of mailing it in, which I understand why people were critical of it. But part of what I've written about is this is normal. Like, it's when it's onset. And this season's been a little early because of it's been de facto done for a while. Like, most leagues aren't done this early. And the guys are just kind of, existing in their headspace about, they can do math. These guys aren't, morons. They know that when the league's functionally done. And the other thing I'll add is that there's been a material shift in some of the, as I call it, controllable risk or controllable variance, which are finishing. We talked about this in recent weeks.
Yeah.
The finishing has been so good in many ways. Yeah. And
it wasn't like I get worried when you come off the pitch, you've lost the game and you've created like 1xG, right? I'm going to start, projecting some worry at this point. We've come off the pitch 2.5xG, right? Like almost a 2xG difference. This is really annoying. It's really frustrating, but fundamentally, you should win that game. You really should win that game.
But it was also, so this is the anchoring bias. I mean, the first hour to 70 minutes from a Celtic perspective were an abomination. Like, they were horrible.
Oh yeah,
it was. St Johnstone was beating us. Whether
just James, just to finish up on the pressing thing. So I just checked. St Johnstone applied like 227 pressures. The average against Celtic in the league is 190. So they were going over and above. And again, they didn't have a lot of regains. But again, we've talked about this. The objective wasn't necessarily to regain the ball. It was just
they weren't high pressing.
Celtic playing. They weren't high pressing. They were just trying to stop Celtic playing. They went man to man in midfield. We persisted in trying to play ticky-tacky football through the middle of the pitch. Again, the ball was all over the place. They kept intercepting it. It kept breaking down, etc. And that's kind of how it played out. So they were playing for their lives. They're literally playing for their professional lives, these guys. And this is the upside to. And we talked, over the last couple of weeks about, league reconstruction and all that. The split actually does produce a lot of jeopardy for teams and a lot of hope as well. These guys aren't out. They're not relegated yet. So you've got to give them credit. You've got to give their manager credit for adapting 100%. His tactics and for getting his tactics absolutely spot on. That's not to excuse Celtic. Ours were not spot on and they weren't executed well. That's on Rodgers and the players. But isn't it simply, taking all that, isn't it simply the case just to say, they're dialing it in, they don't care. It's, it's very difficult. I don't know that we have been in this situation where the league's been done quite as early. I think the second season under Rodgers, or first season under Rodgers, didn't it? We win it in like the 2nd of April or something. Something ridiculous. We
Yeah.
won 5-0 at Hearts, and there was like
Yeah,
still
but
about
the whole thing then was to
10
have an
games to go or
invincible
something.
season. There was an
Yeah, then it was
artificial
like, yeah,
pressure. You
exactly,
can't lose.
exactly
You
that,
can't lose.
exactly
We
that.
have to get the invincible. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, exactly
That was a
exactly
form
that.
of jeopardy, even though it's not competitive jeopardy in like the purest sense.
Yeah,
But yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah. So to your point, like this is totally off brand. Like I think there are certain games when the qualitative factors are so skewed, and I mean, you're talking about finishing, like post shot XG, like we've had a really good season finishing wise, and this was not one of those games. So it was a combination of we hit Hatate hits the post, Forrest has it was an okay finish. It wasn't like an abomination. He put it like central, but their keeper made a really athletic move to get back into the central part of the goal, and their keeper had a pretty good game. So between those two things, above and beyond all the other crap that we were awful on, and we were really only good for the last 20 minutes when we were dominant. Like if you look at all your stat pack with the pack passing and like that, the last kind of 20 plus minutes is when we completely, we had maybe it was Rodgers, maybe it was the subs. Who knows? We can't kind of attribute that.
The subs made a big difference. I mean,
Yeah,
you could argue like McCowan, Yang, Forrest, any of them could be sort of player of the match just for the the impact they made in that second half. I mean, Yang had the second highest packing score. He's only on the pitch 45 minutes. So yeah,
at least relative to McCowan, compare him to Engels, who's been playing on cow pastures more in the last 5 years.
But again, come back to Engels. I keep saying this. He's never played as much football in his life as this. Somebody made a good point. And apologies, I can't even remember where I saw it or who it was. So I do apologise. That it took Tom Rogic like 2 years to start to become an effective player for Celtic. It took Scott Brown about 2 years when he was signed. And he might have been 22 from memory. So I know you're not hot on Engels, and maybe I'm a bit too kind of defensive on him, but I still think we have to give the kid time. And he's not used to being flogged to death. He's not used to playing on a cat field either. He didn't have a great game, and he did look stiff and awkward with the ball bouncing around at his feet, etc. And he didn't find a way to influence the game like he often does. But I'm going to bury him for it. It's maybe it would benefit him. I thought McCowan was excellent, Yang was excellent, Forrest was excellent. Fine, all right, put them on against Kilmarnock. Let's see how they get on. I don't have a problem with that. They all played with an energy that maybe some of them are lacking. And you know what? Okay, tell you what, we've got a cup final, semi-final coming up. We've got a cup final coming up. You show me you can get back into the team. That's fine. But I'm not going to, I'm not going to bury them for it.
I'm generally very much pro player, on a kind of personal basis, and I 100% root for Engels on a personal level. Like I think he's been a good professional. It seems like he's really trying hard, and despite my skepticism on his profile fit with Celtic, like all of these guys, anytime we sign anyone, I'm hugely pulling for them from a personal perspective. But one of my concerns, to a degree, I was a little squishy on Rodgers' response because it to me, it echoed a little bit like the post-Dortmund response in a sense that it's like, is this a mentality issue? This goes back to the piece I wrote, and I wrote one in early March, basically exploring this topic. What the league's done, how much does the intensity drop? Like performance levels, do they come down? And I even went to the, that season that shall not be named, which is 2020, 2021, and looked at how much Rangers fell off a cliff. And they did. Like after we lost to Ross County in February of 21, their performance levels fell off a cliff. Now they still didn't lose, right? But they weren't anywhere near as good as they had been because the intensity level dropped off. There was no crowd, whatever, et cetera.
God bless Crawford Allen, yeah.
Well, right, and we had all of the good work that you've done on the randomness. But the other part of that is we've lost 3 games now by 1 goal. And if you look at the sequence here, the pendulum has swung back a little bit on finishing and goalkeeper play. So all three of those games could have very easily been draws.
We're not
Which
generating the XG, as I've said. There is a discernible drop off in first half. I'm not looking at second half,
the
but
first
in first
half,
half
you're
intensity.
right.
And therefore, the game changes. If you concede an early goal like we have been, you go behind, you're chasing the game.
Yep.
It changes it. It changes it. You look at St Johnstone. I mean, it was perfect for them. They could they could make an event out of every throw in, every goal kick took like nearly a minute. All that they could just make an absolute drama or a sitcom out of every single set play and just limit the amount. All this stuff with the ball boys. All that. Listen, I'm not having a go at them. Fair
Not at
play to them.
all.
They're trying to stay in the Premier League. All that. I get it. The referee is going to let them get away with it. That's not their problem. So
That's the ref's
yeah,
fault.
but yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we knew that was going to happen under Dickinson, but yeah, and so you go behind all that, and so we do need to I think address that because that does put it at jeopardy. I think even the semi final. I'm not saying it puts the league under jeopardy, but things will get tetchy if we sort of lose another 3 or 4 league games between now and the end of the season, right?
No, I mean, I think this is objectively true. My bias, objective, but if we don't win the cup and we lose at Ibrox, like that's a whole different tenor.
Hmm.
Given what's going on with the trends of performance levels, even above and beyond the results over the last 2 months, if you kind of project that, and that's the way that the season finishes with what I've been writing stuff about it. Like I've had agina. I've been a little anxious starting in like January, looking towards next season. If Tony Bloom does get fully adopted at Hearts, and that's my big obsession. Like, oh my God, that could be a big deal.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about
For what
this in
it's
a
worth,
little bit.
I think that'll take longer than people. And I think
It
Hearts will
might.
probably be patient, but I think it'll take longer than people realise.
It
That's not a
might.
quick fix. That's not a quick fix.
I'm more skeptical than you are, but I understand where you're coming at, and you may very well be right. If global markets respond to tariffs in a wonderful way that no one's expecting at the moment, and private equity doesn't melt down, which we'll talk about in a little bit, then maybe Rangers in a different place than they have been this season. So I worry about the transition to next season with this makeup of our squad and the potential for turnover. But we're not going to belabor that today because I think a lot of the things, these latent forces that we've been talking about all season, basically, some of them are manifesting and they get exposed when intensity levels just go down a little bit. I think these guys are good professionals. They're really working hard with maybe a couple of understandably selfish priorities that with Kuhn and Schlupp and guys who basically have already checked their ticket out in a couple of months for their own reasons. That's really all it takes, and that is somewhat new. But I think that speaks to the level that we're at in kind of recruitment and
It
squad
also
talent.
serves to highlight, to your point, it also serves to highlight that we're not when everybody's not, let's call it, at it for whatever reasons that we can humanly explain. The differential, as I've said many times, is not as big as you might think. It's not equivalent in talent as to pounds and pence. That's the point. Celtic are spending millions to get another 0.5% better players than what
Yep.
they've got. That is the sad truth. But that's probably true throughout the world, actually. If you're not, and we've seen this in other leagues. You've seen, even teams that are still in the Champions League. We've seen them lose. Real Madrid lost at the weekend, for example. Bayern Munich have had some bad results. These we can't underestimate the cumulative impact of the Nations League and these
Oh,
expanded Champions Leagues, etc. Especially at the top players in the top divisions as well. Everyone's talking about the quality of the English Premier League, and a lot of the top teams have not performed well. Even
I
Arsenal,
I I
have
know I've only
had a
been
lot
in
of bad
country for.
results. Hmm.
I think I've only been in country for a week, but forgive me if I don't translate this properly. But I think they call that shite, Alan. Is that the
Aye.
quality has been shite? Yeah,
Yeah.
I've heard that
Yeah.
word a lot of times.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
Yeah.
I said before we went live, we started recording, like our players are, the guys that have been mostly on international duty, like Johnston, not ubiquitous, but a lot out on international duty, have functionally not had a vacation in 9 months. Like they might have had a day off here and there. So how many, most of us fat slobs, put my hand up, we're not trying to expend our energy on a world-class level physically. And I get tired getting out of bed. If I sleep until like 6:30 instead of 8:30, it's like, forget about it on a weekend. Right. And these guys are maybe having one day off in 6 weeks, these guys have really been flogged. And I think this goes back to this human level. Like I get why people are really annoyed by what went on Sunday, but I have a hard time slagging these guys off because they really, I think, generally have put forth incredible effort, actually. If you just take a broader perspective, this season is nuts.
Yeah, every week, I think I was saying, well, again, a very consistent level of performance. That was kind of the mantra as we go on, and to give them credit for that. But therefore, when it drops off, it's noticeable. But that consistency and that playing, however many games it was in that period between sort of end of September, October, and February, March, that comes at a cost, right? The results kept coming. They won virtually every game. They more or less set up the league to win. Now, but understandably, to achieve that consistency requires a lot of effort. Requires all that pressing and counter pressing. A lot of the stuff is off the ball that we're talking about here, and that's the bit I think that we didn't see, but is probably more noticeable than the in-game stats. The on-ball stats, the off-ball stats are the ones where I think we saw the biggest drop off, and that's probably the first thing to go when you're generally sort of fatigued. But listen, I think we've done this to death. So we teed this up earlier, so I wanted to have a little bit of fun with you, set you up a little bit here, James. So, thanks to Mr. Trump's casino chaos, capitalism, markets are in turmoil. I'm smiling here. I'm like fucking I'm not. I've got my fingers in my ears and I'm closing my eyes and I'm not opening my app to look at my pension fund. I'm not doing it. I'm just simply not even going to look at it. Right. So and a lot of people will be impacted normal people, working people will be impacted in a very negative way. But listen, I know that you historically, through your other account on Twitter, your other interests, you have the same sort of satirical disdain, if you like, for the mainstream media coverage of economics and markets as I do for those peddling shite in the Scottish football arena. But pertaining to these two worlds have kind of collided recently. The world of macroeconomics and of market volatility and Scottish football. And just wanted to quote a couple of pieces from the very august still Financial Times, but you can probably tell me that they've gone down the pan as well, which is fair enough. And so again, this is as it pertains to private equity. Listen, will nobody think of the poor private equity professionals? If ever there's a group of people in society that has a hard time, it's these guys and girls. So
play the violin, right?
Times,
a little mini violin.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So what the Financial Times has been saying is, large institutional investors are studying options to shed stakes in illiquid private equity funds after the rout in global financial markets pummeled their portfolios, according to top private capital advisors. This is on the back of Trump's, scattergun tariff approach. The calls by pensioners and endowments seeking ways to exit their investments, probably at discounts to their stated value, are a bad sign for the $4 trillion buyout industry. Industry giants such as Blackstone, KKR, Carlyle all saw their stocks plunge between 15% and more than 20% on Thursday and Friday. And then it goes on. The race to find liquidity signals that investors in private equity funds increasingly expect to receive few cash profits from their holdings this year and may face liquidity pressures that cause them to further retrench from making new investments. Last year, the private equity industry's assets dropped for the first time in decades, according to Bain & Co.'s fundraising plunged 23% from 2023. So that's their view on kind of private equity markets. Bringing it back to the world of Scottish football. Then, so If you are a poor, cash-strapped, loss-making, revenue stymied, reputationally damaged, plagued wee football franchise in Scotland with an irascibly racist, discriminatory, and sectarian fan base, even the deluded hope dealers in the Scottish sports media can't whip up giddy status on this one, surely. If anyone can polish the Ibrox turds, James, I know it is you. Amidst the decimation in the markets, what hopes are you selling to the everyone and anyone?
Yeah. Well, let me start with the positive from a Celtic perspective. Is I think that with what's been happening, and this is something that we've talked about, Alan, you and I, for the last couple of years, was this kind of storm has been brewing, not because of the specifics of the Trump tariff nonsense, but we have a massive asset bubble, a massive concentration of wealth, a lot of it financed and driven by government spending and central banks in the West since COVID. And it's created this kind of artificial nonsense that the top 1% has benefited from. So it was a matter of when, not if, that bubble gets pricked, that you start to get consequences. Like that's the lesson of history. And so my thought has always been, for a while now, I should say, that's oxymoron, but for a while now, was that the people who have been funding Rangers through these soft loans, if they start to have material direct impact on their financial well-being, they may not be able to do that. So I park that. That's separate. So this, I think, from people who don't have FU money, right? So when I say FU money, it's all relative. Like I don't have a cajillion dollars like Dermot Desmond, where if I just say, well, let me write a check for 50 million and it's like, 3 months interest on my bank account. Like that's FU money, which is kind of his financial relationship with Celtic. I think a lot of people that have been floating these soft loans to Rangers, that's not the case. Like it's a material part of what their financial well-being is. And if a lot of the other pieces of what they have exposure to tanks, that can have a big impact. So I've long thought that if what hits the fan, that some of that funding could dry up. I think that let's park that. That's very negative if the PE deal doesn't go through. This goes back to something that we've talked about on here, is that it all comes down to negotiating leverage when you start dealing with sharks. And my sense, so I've looked at him a little bit to Kavanaugh. I don't know who he is. I should say I didn't know who he was or is until I looked into him a little bit. I don't know a lot about him, but from what I can ascertain, he's been more of an entrepreneur than a Bain Capital. So people throw around terms like PE. PE is like most people analogize it to Bain Capital, to BlackRock, the ruthless. I have no affinity for PE. I find them objectionable, like morally reprehensible, like Richard Gere and Pretty Woman scumbag level of human beings that are just looking to rape, pillage, and plunder financially. So they disgust me as kind of a group of institutional money. I don't think that's this guy. Like I think both him and 49ers group, they're more of a hybrid of entrepreneur and family office. So to label them as private equity, I think is a misnomer. They're private capital, no question. Like they're not going to deploy money. So I think that is different when we're talking about markets melting down. Now, I'm not saying that stuff going to crap is not going to impact them. It very likely will. It's their heuristic on decision making is going to be different than a Bain Capital and a BlackRock, where they will just cut you like they wouldn't give a shit. Like they'd cut their mother off if it meant that that's what's going to take in order for them to make it.
It would not be true to say that. I'd argue that one of those BlackRock, true private equity deal, there is actually a deal to be done here. You literally just sell and lease back the lot, and you just coin some money in, and then just let it trundle along, right? That's actually the least risk play, right? That's the easiest play.
Yeah. So
developing players is hard, right? Winning the Scottish Premier League, getting past Celtic is hard. Getting to the Champions League is hard. lot of risk factors you cannot control in that. But what you can control with a true private equity play would be that whole kind of right. Well, the ground, that's not yours anymore. The stadium, that's not yours anymore. The revenue streams, they're not yours anymore.
Yeah,
That's an easy play.
my skepticism on the deal has been completely about price and structure. So again, this comes back to understanding how these transactions take place. Is how much is going to be equity capital, how much is going to be financed through debt, through external channels. What's the price? Hello, that's a huge part of this. So this is what I was saying. Like the whole time I've been looking at this potential deal structure, I'm like, well, like if I'm Kavanaugh and the 49ers group, I am going to pummel these guys to get it down to a level that's going to make them scream in pain.
Their shares now, I mean, and I'm not just talking about them, but any football club, I mean, their shares will be worth a lot less than they were a week ago, right?
Possibly, yep. So again, it's about liquidity. You don't really, I would think, but it depends on where they're trading, and it's all about buyers and sellers and that type of thing. And usually these deals occur at a premium to what's going on. Mm. But so because of the fractured share base of Rangers, you've got to corral the cats, so to speak. And I don't mean that in a pejorative. I mean that's corporate finance reality, 101. Yeah. When you're negotiating deals, if you got a lot of parties involved, they all have their own interests. They all have their own bias, reference bias. Like I paid this for that. I'm not willing to exit at that, that type of thing. So
their own motivations, desires, tactics, all that.
Yeah. So maybe perversely, if I'm a family that has a lot of my wealth wrapped up in liquid markets that's tanked 20% in the last, month, maybe I'm willing to negotiate at a lower price than I would have been otherwise because I'm like, I need money. So you just don't know. That's kind of my part is that you don't know what the factors are going to be for people. It just gets more complicated when you got a bunch of parties that are playing out. But simplistically,
just to be clear, the one thing which I don't think you're saying, but just to be absolutely 100%, what hasn't changed is that Kavanagh and whoever else it is behind the scenes, and I think Jed York came out and said it's not us. This has nothing to do with us, right? So there might be people who work for or have association with some aspect of the 49ers group that are involved in this. Maybe not. We don't know. But whoever it is, they're not doing this because they had pictures of Sandy Jardine on their wall. Because they're not doing it because they get the club, right? So that hasn't changed. No. That hasn't changed.
100%. And from what I've been able to ascertain from reading the reports and seeing various, people involved in private equity, that kind of thing, is that it looks like a consortium that the 49ers are a important piece of it, but they are not the lead in this. That doesn't mean that their part's not important. And again, if Kavanaugh is in fact the fulcrum of this, from what I've been able to ascertain, he's more of an entrepreneur type. So from a Celtic persuasion and perspective, like I've always screamed about, oh my God, the big threats, this is why I'm losing sleep over Tony Bloom, is Tony Bloom's probably the creme de la creme of architect, as I call them, people that can just come in and build a model to compete at a superior level with the resources available. Well, if this guy's an entrepreneur, I'm not drawing similarity with him and Bloom, but he's at least theoretically oriented towards building something over a long. So this is when people say a PE model is 5 to 7 years. That's true if you're Bain or BlackRock. This doesn't look to me like that. It looks to me like it could be a longer term. I'm not saying that they wouldn't sell in 5 to 7 years if the price reaches what they're looking at. I'm saying that their potential expected time frame could be longer than that. So that's where Kavanaugh's profile doesn't. The way I characterize these people as mercenaries, right? So wham, bam, thank you, ma'am type of thing. His track record, I don't think, has been that. So with him being
So
potentially the
he was
pivot
he was
man.
characterized to me as somebody that probably wouldn't even be as wealthy as Douglas Parr. So that's
Oh
the kind
yeah,
of
it's
level. That's the level we're dealing with here. We're not talking about a Dermot Desmond
yeah.
type of
Oh no,
operation
yeah.
here.
From what I've been able to tell, this guy's not an fu money kind of guy, which
Yeah,
speaks
yeah.
to. So again, there's good and bad to that. So the deep pockets aren't there, but why the hell would he be doing this? So my sense is that if he's an entrepreneurial type, and he's willing to take this kind of risk with the amount of capital relative to his net worth that he would have to do, he's either crazy, which
Mhm.
could be, or he sees the potential for risk reward that's asymmetric.
Fair enough, and that's all the efficiency, which all takes time. You don't.
Yeah,
That's more of an organic thing. You don't. You just suddenly become a super efficient sporting
100%,
organization, because
100%.
again, what doesn't change is that they have been successful on the pitch when they've vastly overspent off the pitch historically.
Yep,
Yeah,
yep,
they've spent money they don't have, and that's when they've had success. And that I can't believe that will be the model that will be deployed here. So that's going to be painful. Now, you may be smart, and it may be that you can simultaneously have an organisation that lives within its means, accepts its place as being significantly financially smaller than Celtic, but is, however, so smart that it can outperform on the field. That is
yeah,
all possible, but I would posit that that would take an amount of
yeah. But
time to put all
that's
the
the
parts
wild
in place
card.
to make that work. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that given we have no
Mm,
track, this is why I talk about Bloom being
mm,
the
mm.
obvious
He
risk.
knows what he's doing in this business. We
He
have
has
no
a
idea. Yeah,
he
yeah,
has a turnkey. Like
yeah.
he's if anyone has been in the United States, he's Chick-fil-A who's just going to drop a Chick-fil-A chicken store in your neighborhood, and it's going to do 4 million a year in revenue because
Mm,
it's Chick freaking fillet, right?
mm,
It's just they've replicated this no matter where in the country. They just have a
mm,
trap. The way they run their business, they're extremely good at doing it, and
mm,
that's Tony Bloom in my mind.
mm,
There's a lot of unknowns given this potential transaction. My
mm.
anxiety is more so about I don't think the thresholds are there, and that Celtic have a particular window of vulnerability heading into the summer, given our squad, the maturation of that squad, meaning that how long they've been at the club, and how there could be a cluster of guys that want to leave and stress test our recruitment.
I accept that, and I agree with it. But it's
Yeah,
also that's more of a tactical point, I would say, because if you're going to if
it's
you
the
unless
transition. Yep.
unless the economic situation changes, and there's no reason to suggest that it will in Scotland, Celtic have got an overwhelming, financial advantage. So you could one year you could be really smart, like happened with Bassey, Patterson, all that, and you might hit the jackpot with a number of transactions all in the same year, and Celtic might have an absolute nightmare. Right, but what about the
Yep.
year after? And what about the year after that? And what about the year after that? And what about the year after that? You have to keep that
100%.
going. You got to be lucky a lot of times for it to be sustainable, and then for you to even think about how you're going to get, and then it comes back to customer sentiment. How patient are you prepared to be? Can you see what's happening here, and can you get behind it? Even though it might mean, well, first 5 years we might win one trophy a year, right? The next 5 years
Yep.
we're shooting for winning the league, right? Is that going to play? I'm just making that up in terms of timeframes. But if you're going to seriously, root and branch an organization and turn it from what it is at the moment, which is an absolute train wreck, into an efficient organization. As we all know, change takes time. Change is complex, and it will take time. And then for the actual results and to flow through, you're looking at a reasonable time period into the sort of medium term, I would say.
Yeah,
Now,
and
you can always get lucky. You can always get lucky, as I say,
right.
but we're talking about
Yeah, so
sustainability here.
the only so I agree with you on the sustainability part. I think that it's like a scatter plot. I think that where I would probably be different in my assessment is that I think our vulnerability is greater relative, not only because of luck, because as we talk about endlessly, just normal variance in a season. Like, I think the gap to get within that window, and I think about and talk about this within like a 10-year window,
Mhm.
right? So I wrote a piece, 3 or 4 years ago, basically talking about like if Rangers get their act together to a degree, we're going to be back in, they were going to be somewhere between, Dortmund plus relative to Celtic. So over a 10-year period, Dortmund wins 1 out of 10, maybe. So they're not at that level of deficit financially. So it would be somewhere in the 3 to 4 range,
No, it is.
probably.
Sorry, the financial. I looked at the financial gap between Dortmund and Bayern Munich is
Bigger.
enormous.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah, yeah.
170.
So
It's like 170 million of revenue. It's like crazy.
yeah, so that's what I was saying. They're much closer to us. So on a 10-year basis, reasonably speaking, them winning 3 to 4 leagues just because of normal variance would not be crazy. Not refereeing or they have a good season finishing or their opposition keepers suck against them that season and that kind of thing over 38 games. Like it's close enough that kind of nonsense can actually drive a league. And so I think if this happens, and again, it's a huge if. I mean, again, that's I've been saying this the whole time. Like, there's a lot of people that have been way out over their skis because of how complicated these things are, and corralling the cats. But if it does happen, I'm of the view that we're so vulnerable because of how, the lack of modernization in football operations and recruitment in particular. That I think them closing that gap is. This is why a guy like, again, I don't know him, but if I was an entrepreneur, I would look at Celtic. As I've written this about Bloom, we are a low hanging fruit. If you're a vicious, competitive, capitalist minded person looking to look for a club that could be easily overtaken because you get run smartly, I think we are very vulnerable in that regard.
Mhm. Yeah,
And it could be one season. It wouldn't be, in my mind, this is where we disagree probably. I don't think it would take a long time. I think it would basically be one window where we flush the toilet again, like we've done the last 4, and they sign 2 or 3 good players who could be on loan from, who knows where. Whether it's Leeds or Hearts from Union Saint-Gilloise or from Brighton. I mean, like, we're opening up a can of worms here. I don't know which one. This is the thing. If you add 2 now that are viable, now just one of them has to be a problem. So you're now doubling your risk factor as far as someone jeopardizing what you're doing. And all of a sudden, us getting to 85 points is like, oh, wow, or 80. And so instead of the 90, 95 point normalcy of the unipolar Celtic Scottish
I
League.
accept all those risks.
Yeah.
I just think turning it into a money making operation, you really need to get into the Champions League, and because of coefficients, that's a very very tricky. You couldn't run your operation on the assumption that's going to happen. So you'd have to cut your cloth
No.
accordingly. That makes that very 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 tricky. I mean, having watched Hearts the last time they came to Celtic Park, I have to say, that's why I said to you, I think
Oh,
Hearts will improve. I think Hearts will have got
they're
it
not there yet.
in their grasp. They're not in their grasp to be at least third, solid, like clear third, in the next few years. But based on the players I've seen that they have, I think they're an improvement, and clearly we can see that in the league table. But they're not there yet. They're not those
Well,
kind of players that will have Celtic going, oh my god, they're going to
and
turn us over. Not yet. They could get there. They could get there in time.
We're selfish to a degree. We're human. The fact that Hibbs is being partnered with a bunch of smart people too, like that's
Yeah.
good. Like
Yeah.
that.
Well, no, if the reaction to this is Celtic thing, hang on, what are these clubs doing now to improve? Why aren't we doing that? I have a real fear that no one will even ask that question or make that observation. That's my concern, really. But
Yeah.
then and the whole lot comes up in quality. Fine, that's a good thing.
Yeah, Hibs aren't going to be a pushover. Like the guy that run the people that run Bournemouth, they're not just going to sit there and go, "Oh yeah, Tony Bloom," have at it, Tony. That's not how this works. Like these guys are ruthless competitors. They want to win. So yeah, I think that's the optimism I think for the whole league is the idea that there's really smart people now at Hibs theoretically, and again this is the risk that they don't. Whether Hibs or Hearts, they don't embrace kind of the intellectual capital that's being offered to them and deploy it. But if they do, I mean, I don't discount either of those clubs as far as, because as you come back to it, it only takes a certain number of games, or all of a sudden what we find comfortable, the kind of high 80s to mid 90s point accumulation. All of a sudden you're talking about a league this is Belgium. Like, this is the Belgium model. Like, all of a sudden you're in the mid high 70s, low 80s. It's like, this is a freaking free for all post split. And that, from a neutral perspective, or the people at these other clubs, that would be fantastic, and probably for the SPFL. But from a Celtics supporters perspective, it's like, holy shit.
So again, listen, I agree with all that, and I agree, accept all of those risks. But we're not in the days where Roman Abramovich can rock up at Stamford Bridge and just fucking buy.
No, it's not about money.
Players.
It has nothing to do with money. It's all about being smart.
Being smart, changing the culture, embedding.
Yep.
And then seeing that
and
play
that's
out.
hard stuff, man. That is hard stuff.
It's hard stuff, and it takes time. I really, even in a uncompetitive league like Scotland, it will take time. Having looked at Hearts, I think they're improving. I'm sure they'll improve again next season, of course. But could they be challenging for second, maybe in 2-3 years? Yeah, and that's fine. And for Hearts, that's probably great. But my point being, these things are difficult, and they do take time.
And not only
especially when you're balancing the books as well, because let's not forget, these people are here to make money, right? They're not here. They're not here to watch so and so from Belgium play up front. They're here to make money.
I know he has a mixed perception among Celtic supporters, but I'm friends with Roger Mitchell, and I wrote a piece for his website a few years back talking about how this analytics revolution is not linear. And I went through the Boston Red Sox, which is the Fenway Group that owns Liverpool, and just look at what happened in Liverpool. I mean, you basically had Schlott come in, and they got better. Why? I would argue because they actually kind of let the geeks take back over a little bit. And they had the manager as God, understandably, like, I get it. And it happened at the Red Sox. I wrote about in there in the column that they had won 3 World Series in 5 years. And then they had this kind of megalomaniac GM come in and raid the farm system and totally change the model that the geeks were putting into place. He did win one World Series, and then it's been a dark, decade since. And that's, so these things are pendulums that take place. It's not like you just flip a switch. It's an arc to get there, but then also it's a constant, just do things smart. And it's hard to balance short, medium, and long term. Like, how do you plan for all this stuff? Prioritize. These are not algorithms. These are judgments and, best faith efforts.
In the meantime, your owner wants paid. So your owner, in the meantime, is saying, we are selling your 3 best players this summer.
That's exactly right.
We are putting the ticket prices up 10%. By the way, we're doing all these things while you're being smart over here, because I've got to make my money.
100%.
So both of those things, I think, will be true.
I 100%. We're in total agreement there. So let's leave it there, Alan. You and I in agreement, which doesn't happen all the time. This will be my last broadcast for Merchant City. I will not be on the show on Thursday as I fly back to the United States. But Martin will be here on our usual extra time broadcast at huddlebreakdown.com. Any other things you want to tee up for the week, Alan?
Not particularly, just with it being obviously no midweek games, it'll probably be a whole hour and a half dedicated to poetry, I should imagine.
You know what? We got a lot of feedback on that. We do Poetry Corner almost all weeks, but we missed it last week. So I think you should do Beowulf in full. How about that?
Recite a James Joyce book. How about
that? Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Like, subscribe, and I'll be back next week with Laura and Alan. And for those subscribers on huddlebreakdown.com, Alan will be there with Martin, probably out on Friday. So thanks, everybody.